Okay, so about me. My name is David Burkett. Again, I am the founder of Signal Lure Cyber Threat Intelligence. I'm going to talk to you all today about the kill chain. Just a little bit about me first. So my background, as Eric mentioned, I've built a few SOCs. I've been a SOAR architect for Palo Alto Networks, where I managed 40 different SOAR platforms for major Fortune 500 organizations, as well as some large federal government agencies. Which was really great because I got to see what a lot of different security operations centers were doing and actually get really involved and deep into the weeds around automating a lot of their playbooks. So that was one of my favorite gigs, but of course, having 40 one-hour Zoom calls scheduled per week was not my jam, so no longer there. But that was a really great time for me. And then probably the achievement that I'm most proud of is while I was the SOC manager at an aerospace company, we actually received the Cogswell Award for being one of the top 1% of cleared facilities in the United States in terms of the cybersecurity program. So that's me, a little bit about me, and share. So let's talk about the kill chain. Everyone these days seems to really focus on MITRE, and with good reason. It has a lot of uses, including being able to communicate different attack techniques to different organizations, making sure you have some sort of consistent language. But there's also a lot of, I guess you could say, difficulties with it. There's a lot where the kill chain will actually pick up and get rid of some of those difficulties for you. So for example, one of the things that I really like about the kill chain is that it's still taught. So your new analysts are more likely going to be familiar with it. It's a lot smaller to teach, so it's a lot easier to just pick up and kind of come to grasp. And it's also so much easier to map to than the MITRE attack framework. So if you've ever tried to map your detection program to the MITRE attack framework, you know that all of your tools probably claim that they do some sort of MITRE attack, correlation or whatever it might be, but they all distribute that in metadata in different ways or show it to you in different ways. So while they may align to it, it could be hard to actually make use of that data. And if you're a smaller company, trying to keep up with the amount of new techniques that come out, making sure that you're getting things tagged properly, that sort of thing, it's really time consuming, especially as you're pumping out, maybe 20 plus detectors a day per person. So there's a lot of kind of faults with the MITRE attack framework where the kill chain can come in and actually do us a lot of good. So part of the places that the kill chain is really weak is the language that it uses itself. My biggest complaint with it is that there is a lot of overlap, a lot of vagueness. For example, my least favorite phase being the installation phase. What does that mean? So it's something that I feel like is hard to really grasp, especially as a defender who might not have that attacker mindset. Maybe he's only ever worked on the blue team. So one of the things that I thought would be useful and something that you can do with the framework if you understand it well enough is actually modify it to suit your needs. And I've actually gone through and done that. So again, like I said, the wording choice is poor. One of the other things is whenever I was getting started as a SOC analyst, I didn't actually know how to apply the kill chain. I thought it was more like an academic way of thinking. And I didn't realize that it could actually be used as a way to help guide my investigations. And again, a large part of that was just language. So let's talk about language. I've never actually heard this name, so if I mispronounce it, forgive me, but it's the Superior Wharf hypothesis. If you're not familiar with it, essentially says that based on the language structure that a culture has, it's going to change or potentially have them elicit different thoughts on what words you use. For example, maybe my favorite one is probably going to be the word like freedom. So for example, if you're in a jail cell, the word freedom is probably going to mean something very different to you than if you're a SOC analyst in a room with no windows just waiting to get off work. That's a good way to kind of show where we can use the language as a way to get our defenders thinking in a more, I guess, defensive mindset and help make this thing easier. So what I've done is broken the kill chain out into what I call the investigator's mental model. You call it whatever you want. It's essentially the same thing, but a lot of the things that I did is I changed the language around in a lot of the phases to be more defensively focused. I've also broken out that installation phase so that it's a little more clear. And I found that this model has far less potential overlap or vagueness where you might think, this could be something, that might be the exploitation phase or installation, whatever it may be. This seems to allow you to really align a lot quicker. Again, it's mostly a language change, so we have the discovery phase. As a defender, we know that the attackers are going to do some sort of discovery on us. They're going to look up our organization, our employees, that sort of a thing, see if we have any accounts or passwords that might just already be out there, potential use. We know that they're going to prepare whatever they found and use that against us. That could be the preparation of a deployment. That could be the standing up of new infrastructure. One of the biggest misconceptions is that you don't have visibility into that preparation or weaponization phase. That's actually not totally true. Companies like Soteria have a tool called DNSense, which will actually monitor for domain brand infrastructure that's stood up similar to yours. So you can actually detect that before it's ever actually even deployed against you. Then we have the delivery phase, same as the original kill chain. They have to deliver their exploit, their attack, whatever it is to you. Vulnerability assessment. This is probably the biggest change and the one that's my favorite in terms of language providing a way for you to think differently. So whenever I was getting started, whenever people would talk about the exploitation phase, I never understood how you're supposed to figure out what exploit was being used. So for example, if I have this payload, I'm just like, I have no idea, like if I'm not a red teamer, I don't know necessarily what to look at to be able to tell. But what really changed that for me is when I had somebody kind of say, don't think of it as exploitation, think of it as you assessing what vulnerabilities are on the system and then taking that software that is actually impacted and then looking for the vulnerabilities that might be available that are on that system. And if there aren't any, you might have discovered a 0-day, maybe not. But that could be a good way to think about it and to really understand differently or kind of show the first piece that thinking as a defender can do. Next phase, action execution. That one's pretty obvious. That's typically going to be a process execution, but it doesn't have to be. So one of the things, and we'll actually talk about this, let me actually hit the next slide, that we'll get into is, so when part of the reason I changed this from installation is because not all attacks involve a computer that you're going to install something on. So a great example is going to be like a O365, breach. Someone gets into your O365 account, steals, all your data, puts in some new rules, whatever it might be. I mean, if you walk through this, you have the discovery. Maybe they're looking for your emails, usernames that might be out there. They're going to prepare that, do some automation, load that into, however they're going to, do that. Deliver it. So that just could be through over the network, through some brute forcing. Vulnerability could be something as simple as the user not having two-factor. Now, that's not going to be a vulnerability that has a CVE, but that's going to be a vulnerability in something that's a weakness that you exploit. Action execution. Again, so because we're not calling that installation, we know that they're going to have to execute some sort of action once they're into their impacted environment. So maybe that's going to be stealing emails. Maybe that's going to be trying to see, what all accounts or whatever's in there. And then you have persistence. So again, going back to that O365, there's things like Outlook rules, that like just other accounts that might be created that you didn't know about, put in place. So again, I really feel like this helps kind of break that piece out. We know that they're going to interact with it. Again, I didn't use command and control because not every attack has like a C2 framework. And I think by saying interaction, that the adversary interacting with it is probably going to be over the network. So that is typically going to be what you would consider your C2. And then, of course, the end goal, whatever the action on objectives would be. So the second real big change outside of the language is to think of this as more circular from a tactical level and linear. So the original kill chain is largely thought of as a straight line, which isn't really how attacks work. But whenever you think of it as a circular kind of framework, it becomes a lot different of a way to implement it. So for example, if I'm a bad guy, my first real objective is going to be to get on a system, just to get that initial access. And then from there, my circle is really going to start back over. I'm going to do more discovery, so scanning, see what accounts are available to go through in the domain to potential move laterally. I'm still going to have to prepare that payload to be shot over, or however I'm going to deliver it. I know that I'm going to have to exploit some vulnerability. There's going to be so on and so forth. So it's going to be a continuous circular motion while you're actually investigating, which is another kind of big piece. And then whenever you're done with the investigation, looking back at it at a more strategic or operational level, it'll be more of a linear piece. So you would take all of your findings in each phase of the circle, and then of course just line them up at the end to each phase of that chain. So we talked about ways that we can use this to kind of think differently. So let's kind of go through this and see how we can implement this. I've already talked about it somewhat as a SOC analyst, but again, as a SOC analyst, it's going to be more circular when you're thinking tactically. So, you're going to research the organization, you're going to set up that infrastructure, deliver whatever that payload may be. Could even be just a phone call with the exploitation of being, social engineering. You're going to execute some sort of action, and then so on and so forth, just like we talked about. As a SOC manager, this is where it's going to probably be the most useful for a lot of y'all. So one of the things that is also difficult to align to in the MITRE ATT&CK framework is just having an idea of what all detections that you have in place for your detection coverage. So you do have things where you can make like heat maps and all that kind of stuff, but there isn't actually a MITRE ATT&CK technique ID for every detection that you're going to make. So you're going to have visibility gaps if you're only following that without having some other kind of control. This will kind of help prevent that. As a SOC manager too, the people above you when you're managing a SOC are probably not going to care about the individual techniques or really even know or get that technical. But they might want to say, for example, let's say you just had like a pen test or a red team engagement. They may, maybe data got exfilled or something to that effect. Your SOC director or CISO might say, I want to see all of the exfil detections that you guys have and see if that's something that maybe we need to focus on to start doing detection around that place. Realistically, you're probably going to see most around your action execution, just because new process execution is where a lot of the detection really occurs. But this will also allow you to kind of go through and get an idea of both, what detection coverage you have at a high level, as well as whenever you do have your detections, where you're missing visibility. So if you're constantly, for example, you can't tell what the exploit was that's used, maybe you need better vulnerability management software. And this is now allowing you to provide statistics upwards to say, hey, I need more money, here's why, and now you can show statistics to kind of support that. And then detection guidance. So if we're continually, missing one section of the attack chain, we might want to actually go through and focus some of our visibility and detection efforts there. Detection engineer. So whenever I get intelligence as a detection engineer, I'm going to look at it a few different ways. So the first way, I'm going to assume it's going to come through as, let's just say, maybe we've detected something, the incident's over. It was stopped, but it still made it to where it executed on the box. As a detection engineer, I want to work my way both up and down to see where I can detect that attack in the life cycle, but earlier on. So anything that really makes it past that delivery phase, you want to have an idea of, if it did get past it, how can you detect it in the future? Work with your vendors to go through and actually say, hey, this was missed. We need to fix that. And then, of course, for example, you might say, okay, this detection is going to be potentially based on a vulnerability. You don't want to play whack-a-mole, but you might be something where you can say, okay, this might be a vulnerability that isn't easily patched or isn't easily fixed. And that could be a place, again, where you might be able to make that choice. And then that's it. So I don't actually have a company to really sell anything. If you want to support me, please contact your representatives and ask them to pass the UAP legislation. There's a QR code to it right there, 60 pages of UFO stuff. So please consider doing that, PDF. But yeah, any questions? Yes? No? All right. Perfect. If anybody wants to talk to me about any of this stuff, please let me know. Happy to do that. And if anyone wants to talk about UFOs, again, please let me know. Also happy to do that.
We have one question.
Yeah.
Oh, you know me, I like investigative methodology. I really like what you did there with kind of describing how like an investigation will go from linear to circular.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could go with a hypothetical, maybe you could give a bit more of an example on that. So you've got a, we'll go with something we're both familiar with. We got a big like retail place, we'll say 800 locations across the country or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the network infrastructure at each facility looks generally the same. The attacker gets initial access. They want to create custom malware for that environment, you know, that pulls credit card numbers out of memory or whatever. And, you know, it's in a specific memory address space and a custom written point of sale application or whatever. Well, they have to create all that and do that research in the environment. So, you know, and as we go through and we do that investigation, the nature of the investigation is going to change, right? Depending on when we catch the attacker, whether it's after the fact or in the midst of doing that research and development or doing the, you know, deploying the malware or whatever. Can you kind of walk through any part of that and when your investigation goes from linear to circular and like back and forth?
Yeah, so when I'm actively doing an investigation, it's going to be circular until I reach the end. And what would be more linear whenever I'm looking at it after the fact at a strategic or operational level. Whenever it comes to doing, like actually developing that custom malware that might steal the credit cards, like you mentioned, or whatever from a register, again, I think that would fall under, you know, doing discovery. They're trying to figure out what, you know, POS system you have, what software system it's running. They're going to prepare it, develop that malware. They're going to deliver it somehow. Maybe they already have access to the network and they just have to SCP it to you. They're going to exploit some vulnerability potentially. Maybe they already have the access and don't need to exploit it, but potentially. Execute action, and so on and so forth. And it's just going to work its way back around. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
And so Joshua Finney gave a good presentation this morning about graphing to reduce complexity. And I mean, how would you relate this structure here to what he was saying this morning?
So I personally have not done a lot of graph thinking myself. I'm very familiar with the quote, and I do believe it's an accurate quote. It's just not something that I'm necessarily familiar with enough to kind of say, you know, do a comparison. You know, to me, it feels like by making it circular, it is more, you know, forming a graph or a map, you could say, rather than keeping it lateral. But I'd probably want a second opinion for someone before I get up on stage and say it professionally.
Okay, thank you very much. And I enjoyed your talk very much. Thank you.
When I was giving presentations on MITRE ATT&CK and trying to enable some of my customers on it, they would always kind of key in on just two things: initial access and lateral movement. Mm-hmm. Very rarely did anybody really care about, like, okay, they compromised one host, now they're going to execute, they're going to do discovery because it's just one host. Do you find the same kind of thing when you present this to other people? Do you see people keying in on the same sort of, like, once there's lateral movement, now I have a bigger issue than just initial access, like very specific bits of your framework?
I have to think about that. I don't think so. I don't think that would follow the same, just because it's a slightly different kind of thinking. So with MITRE ATT&CK, and I might be misunderstanding your question, but if I'm understanding properly, it seems like there might be more focus on the techniques in the lateral movement phase and making sure that you have the coverage on it. But this is more of a from start to finish kind of model itself.
I think that it generally was from a tactics perspective of, like, if somebody's going to be able to pivot off of a host, now I have a much bigger problem than what I had originally thought. So, yeah.
I think that's probably going to depend on organization. I would agree with what you're saying, but as far as people kind of like finding a specific place to really focus on, I wouldn't know that I would have one. If I had to guess, I would probably say it would be action, execution, and interaction, just for the fact that you're going to have your process execution. It's the number one forensic artifact for MITRE attack coverage. And then your C2, your network detectors. Those are probably going to be the ones that you have the most coverage on. And then going through and then finding things like in your delivery and persistence are probably going to be the things that, maybe you want to go through and say, hey, I only have a few detections here. Maybe I should go through it. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David.